justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice the people demand. Right to life and security. Oh, what a joy. Oh, what a peace. How great this country could be. Respecting your rights. Respecting human rights.
Welcome to another episode of Let's Start Justice with Jamaicans for Justice on the Bridge 99 FM. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm Michael Jackson, Executive Director of JFJ.
And I'm Jade Williams, the Policy and Advocacy Specialist at JFJ.
So just reminding persons that they can in fact call our hotline and make those comments to us at 676-4996, and you can WhatsApp us at 239-7583. And we're also live on our YouTube platform that we're encouraging you to go and subscribe to. Now, before we get into the meat of the matter, we just want to do our usual, what were some of the human rights issues that came up in the previous week up to today. And I think we can start out by saying to the public that the sexual assault cases, from sexual harassment to sexual assault to rape, they have been making some further updates with the JDF by the person who is front and center, the accused. Apparently he has been pulled from overseas duty and he's to make way back to Jamaica to answer to some of those claims. The other thing I want to point out, last week the Director of Public Prosecution was speaking at an awards ceremony that was put on by LASCO, I believe, where several officers who have done good work were recognized. And in making some commendations of the officers' efforts, and I think the DPP also spoke to the Roshane Barnett matter, wherein the officers, in her estimation, they did good work. We must say we saw fulsome and quick closure to that particular matter. So there are several things that the DPP said that we can agree with. But there was a comment where the DPP called on JFJ and Indicom, I believe, in saying that we should do more around public education, educating people about not resisting arrest when they come in contact with police officers. And it's something that we have cautiously said to the Jamaican public: you need to respect the law enforcement. But there was the language that was used, and our board director, John Clark, spoke publicly on it to say that when you come in confrontation with a law enforcement officer and they are lawfully executing their duties, you are to comply. And the word lawfully
is key. Yes.
In that situation.
It is difficult to tell someone to comply with what
with unlawful actions. However, but I think it's a fine line, because if you believe in the moment you are being disrespected, if you believe in the moment you are being abused in any way, we're not saying to take outright abuse, because, and I did ask you this, if there was anything in law that prevents you from recording evidence or the situation. But we're also saying that people should be respectful, and you should save your life if you believe your life has been threatened. And I think my director said it well: save your life and live to fight another day, because there are avenues for accountability. But we want to also remind the police that there are most officers certainly are doing very good work, good men, good women, but we want to remind them to ensure that they adhere to the use of force policy. And we're calling on the Jamaican government and the Minister of National Security to utilize those body cameras that they say they have and get more. Give the police the resources that they need to do their work, so that if there's some altercation, then the evidence is there
and
to
the
really
evidence would be clear.
Yes, so we're calling for the body cameras. Just two more updates of what happened. Last week we heard from the Minister of National Security that the crime plan, the elusive crime plan, will be shared on November 20th, I believe, so we look forward to that.
Yes.
And we call on the government again to table the Enhanced Security Measures Act so we can get a fulsome idea of where the government's legislative agenda is. And finally, the Minister of State in the National Security, Xavier Main, last week indicated that he is calling on the judges to mandate rehabilitation.
Yes,
You heard those?
Yes, I heard it, and it's a difficult idea to grapple with, to mandate rehabilitation. I'm sure we've seen it in certain circumstances. For example, in drug offenses where someone is, and this is outside of our jurisdiction, obviously, but in drug offenses where someone is the addict, not necessarily the person that is peddling the drugs. One thing that might be mandated is rehabilitation for that person. But in terms of a broad brush, absolute rehabilitation in every single case approach, mandatory, I'm not sure that is the best
approach.
Best approach. It's I can see why we would
I think it's a laudable effort.
Yes, I can see why we would try that. I can see why.
But I would remind the minister, though, respectfully, because when he said it, there was an article that was placed in the Jamaica Observer behind these prison walls, and it outlined all the infrastructural deficiencies in the prison system, where it indicated, I believe, that prisoners were sleeping on irons, iron beds, something of that nature.
When it is not that, it is a slab of concrete.
Yes. And it speaks to how can you have rehabilitation in prisons that are overcrowded. So I think we have to be looking at these things. So before we reach that stage of a mandatory approach, we have to look at what we have already, how effective they are. Are they responsive to the market needs that we're seeing, whether it's animation, graphic design?
Especially when we look at best practice in terms of rehabilitation, especially in Scandinavia, they're known for that. But one thing they're also known for is the quality of the facilities in which they're expected to host prisoners and the programs that are supposed to do the rehabilitation.
So we're saying fix it first before you get to that approach.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I'm going to move quickly into our right of the day. Our right of the day this week is the right to freedom from discrimination. And that is one of our rights in our constitution. But it's not in line with our international standard that we would have gotten this right from. Our right is limited. So in Jamaica, our right to freedom from discrimination is on certain grounds, which is being male or female, your race, your place of origin, your social class, your color, religion, or political opinion. So in some other jurisdictions, Mikkel, they would say, and other characteristics, but unfortunately, this is not one of those places where we say and other. So it's a closed list, and this is where it is.
I have called for that list to be expanded, certainly.
Absolutely, even if it is just to say and other, so that other issues can be considered. And notably missing, for example, is on the basis of disability.
Yes.
And while we do have our Disabilities Act to kind of bridge that gap, it would be great to see that as a constitutional provision.
Yes.
And then we move on to our trivia of the day. Today is a double trivia question, so we are going to call it a super trivia. So this winner will also get a t-shirt, like our first super trivia winner, who I actually saw last week.
Oh, really?
And handed over her t-shirt.
Okay.
But our comms officer missed a good photo up with that. But yes, so our trivia of the day is, when was the Sexual Offences Act passed? That's question 1. And question 2, at what age does the provisions of the act start to apply? So
this one extra bright though.
Yes, it is extra bright. It's for those persons who are looking at their
So
legislation.
it's just $1,000 credit
along
with the t-shirt?
No, it is $2,000 credit with your t-shirt. Wow. Absolutely.
Can the ED apply?
No, the ED may not.
So I can Google.
No JFJ staff can participate, thank you. But you can quickly send a WhatsApp message to our number 2397583, or you can respond to our Instagram page and leave your answer, and we will announce the winner at the end of the show. Believe we're going to a break.
We're going to just quickly review the topic that we're going to be focusing on today, which is looking at the sexual harassment legislation in Jamaica. So we see what is happening with the JDF. And to join us later on in a few minutes with the discussion would be Dr. Nadine Spence, who is a political and social analyst and gender activist, as well as Ms. Kadria Folks, who is an attorney at law with expertise in employment law specifically. So we are aware that the government of Jamaica gazetted the Sexual Harassment Protection and Prevention Act in 2021 November, with the aim of protecting all the citizens in the workplace while renting property, conducting business, or any other daily interactions within the institutions.
Yes, under this legislation, all institutions are required to issue sexual harassment policies and bring those policies to the attention of their workers, clients, their students, residents, or whoever may be engaged in that institution. And they should also advise them as to how to make those sexual harassment complaints and how they will be addressed.
So just going to take a clip from the Minister, Olivia Babsy-Grange.
We have already started to receive complaints, Madam Speaker, and we have been helping companies to put the necessary mechanisms in place to respond to them. So far, the Bureau of Gender Affairs has assisted 200 organizations to draft their sexual harassment workplace policies. We've also been conducting sensitization and awareness raising sessions with public and private sector organizations, NGOs, educational institutions, and other groups. This is not a simple matter, Madam Speaker. It is a serious crime. Unwanted sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and crude sexual behaviors affect quality of life by creating an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment.
That was Minister Olivia Babsy-Grange, who was speaking to the House of Representatives in June of this year. And she further highlighted that the sexual harassment unit that will investigate complaints is being established. Additionally, she said that her consultant, Danny Roberts, has been engaged to assist with the setting up of the Sexual Harassment Tribunal and other related matters.
The tribunal is intended to hear and determine the complaints of sexual harassment at the workplace and other institutions and to adjudicate on the complaints by work of the employer's failure to address those complaints.
The minister further highlighted that the Bureau of Gender Affairs has been mandated to conducting sensitization sessions with the public and private sector groups, NGOs, educational institutions, and other entities. We're going to take a break, and then when we return, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Nadine Spence and Miss Kadra Folks.
Imagine your advertising dollar reaching your Caribbean and diaspora target beyond borders in a single rotation. It happens only on the bridge. Call now to advertise 876-669-5000.
Hi, I'm Ronald Thwaites, and I'm the host of The Public Eye and The Open Mind on the Bridge 99 and Irie Jam in the tri-state area. This program will tell you the truth about life backyard. Fair, open talk, no gossip, no slander. We want to listen to your concerns. We also want to help you with your problems in JA. We at The Bridge rate you and affirm our oneness as citizens of this blessed land we love. So join us now on Wednesdays on The Bridge, crossing the waters, linking Jamaicans and Jamaican lovers everywhere.
Download the Bridge 99 FM app now from the Google Play Store or the Apple Store. Hello, why ya itch? For as low as $900, you can get ready to fly out with a Digicel Caribbean or international roaming plan. It no matter where you're there. Get a plan so you can link up your friends and family, stay connected to your business, and use your favorite apps while you're abroad. With up to 14 gigabytes of data, and now you get free roam like you never left yard. Dial *153 number sign or visit the My Digicel app today to activate a Digicel Roam Easy plan. Text 153 to 137 for more info. Digicel, made in Jamaica.
This is Romain Verga, and you're locked into the Bridge 99 FM. Your Caribbean vibes amplified. Easy.
Wow! Yo, this is Baby Shama, you're locked in on the Bridge. Can you hear me? This is my story. This is the Bridge story. Hey!
The people's champion. Our mission is love.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We are joined today by Dr. Nadine Spence and attorney at law Kadra Folks, and we're looking at our sexual harassment legislation.
Welcome to you both. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Great. Dr. Spence, can we start with you? You're the gender specialist and activist, if we will. Can you just share with our listeners what you would say is the context that we're operating in when you talk about sexual harassment in Jamaica? What are some of the things that you have observed? over time?
Okay, well, I'd say the context is one for us to understand that the situation that we're seeking to address is not limited to institutions. It's expansive, and that any attempt at dealing with it so far as it relates to the current legislation has been focused on institutions. It's a kind of a first look, I think. So if you would notice that one of the conversations being had in the one of the conversations that was had around the legislation was, should it be applicable to catcalling or to calling to women on the streets and so on, and that this legislation doesn't now do that, and that therefore a whole lot of the issues that
Dr. Spence, sorry to cut you, we're hardly hearing. The background is a little bit noisy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually out in my barber shop getting my haircut.
Okay.
It's a little noisy. Is it any better?
We're still hearing the background noise. So just to, before I switch to Miss Folks, you're saying, and I remember some of the organization, they called for street harassment to be considered by the Joint Select Committee at the time, and it was a recommendation that wasn't considered.
Right. So the larger matter of sexual harassment that is taking place on the streets or outside of institutions is not being addressed, and this legislation doesn't at all seek to address that.
Okay.
It's mostly located within institutions, schools, churches, workplaces, and tribunal, and that it is, for me, the important is that it is non-criminal. It's not a criminal, It's not a legislation that seeks criminal remedies. As a matter of fact, I think one of the issues I had with it was that there was only one criminal remedy, and that was if a false complaint is made.
Yes.
So I think the wider context of it is there and hasn't changed, and I think that this is an attempt to deal with sexual harassment within institutions, within workplaces, churches, places of learning, or organizations that fall within the remit of the bill.
Before we move on from it, Dr. Spence, I wanted to ask if you're aware of any legislation or approaches in any other jurisdiction that consider street harassment in the same sexual harassment provisions. Oh, okay. We seem to have lost her, unfortunately. So we'll move over to Miss Folks. So, Miss Folks, we heard Minister Grange state in the little clip that we played that they would have received, I think she said, over 200 complaints. Mikkel, was that what she said?
Yes.
Right. I was wondering, do any of those complaints come through the Ministry of Labour and Social Security? Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of that specifically. I'm no longer a public officer. But through my own private practice, I have become aware of some complaints. Certainly not 200, but enough to be concerned about the prevalence of sexual harassment in workplaces.
And can you, for the purposes of the listeners, can you just quickly walk us through some of the main provisions in the sexual harassment legislation? We heard Dr. Spence outline in Ms. Folks the institutions that are covered, and we noted her concern that the lack of criminal offense, for example, is a concern for her. But for purpose of the listeners, can you just remind us what are some of the main provisions in the sexual harassment legislation before we get into some of the things that we would want to be strengthened and so on?
Certainly. So first of all, the legislation applies to sexual harassment in all areas of work, in institutions, as well as, so in areas of work and in institutions mainly, and accommodation. And sexual harassment, for the purposes of the legislation, is any unwelcome sexual advance from one person to another, which causes the person on the receiving end to feel offended or to be humiliated, or a situation where they're not able to carry out their work-related duties, or a hostile work environment is created as a result of the unwelcome sexual advance.
Okay.
Okay, actually, while we are talking about provisions, one of the provisions I noted is, oh, actually, I can't bring that up.
No, but can I address the concern about the fact that most of the offenses are not criminal? The fact of the matter is
Yes.
that the law does not operate in a vacuum. So there are other aspects of the criminal law that will respond where necessary. So, for instance, where sexual harassment results in rape, there's a law that speaks to that. Where it results in assault, there's a criminal law that legislation that speaks to that. And so sexual harassment as treated under the legislation is just trying to contain or to address the act in a way in which persons can get redressed speedily. And also not every act of sexual harassment results in criminal conduct. Because a sexual advance, yes, it can be physical touching, where you can have other claims for assault perhaps.
Yes.
But you can also have just gestures. It can be innuendos. So based on the scope for actions that can constitute sexual harassment, it's probably not advisable to just have a carte blanche criminal provision, or have the criminal law bring to bear on an act of sexual harassment. It's serious, but it's serious, very serious in some instances, but in other instances, it might not be a criminal or warrant criminal penalty.
But thank you so much for that. So just to put in context for our listeners, you're saying that we shouldn't be looking at this in isolation from your Sexual Offences Act and other pieces of legislation that will be dealing with these issues.
Correct.
But I think when we look at it as well, the hostile working environment and people's mental capacity, feeling like you have no voice, no choice, because we want our opportunity to earn. And when you are harassed daily and you are forced to sit in those situations, the quid pro quo, where I feel like you don't have any choice in the matter, what provisions exist perhaps with fines and penalties for institutions that are found to have breached the legislation?
All right, first of all, the fact of the matter is that in the context of employment, the sexual harassment policy requires that the grievance procedure in the workplace and the disciplinary procedure must be part of that whole response. And so if there is an harasser in a workplace, a worker who is affected in terms of quid pro quo can make a complaint. And then there's that internal mechanism that's triggered so that they can have an appropriate response. Because, coming out of that, depending on how severe the action is, then it can be a situation where the aggressor is then disciplined. So the disciplinary procedure would say, okay, you are found to have committed this act, and based on how serious it is, your services can be terminated. So sometimes the feelings that a worker has can be vindicated in other ways, and not just for somebody to be imprisoned.
Oh, so you're saying that the internal mechanism could be sufficient in some cases?
In some cases, yes, because, sometimes an aggressor can be removed from the workplace, whatever the outcome is, but the internal procedure gives the employer or the employment space an opportunity to see how best to work out the situation in a way that can, the parties can perhaps still maintain a working relationship. Because we need to understand, for instance, there can be different things at play. Sometimes parties at work are in a consensual relationship. And when that breaks down, then you can have concerns about harassment being expressed by one party. And so in a space where all of that evidence, there's that investigation and all of that can come out, sometimes what can happen is that in terms of providing a remedy is for one party to be removed from the environment. That can look like separation from employment, but it can also look like being sent to another location where they're not there in the person's space.
Okay, if I could just ask a question when we're talking about this in particular, I noticed that the Act goes as far as to cover domestic workers.
Yes.
But the Act also, as you would have stated just now, requires you to use your internal mechanism prior to approaching the tribunal. So considering a domestic worker is likely not to have an internal mechanism and the tribunal is not yet constituted, where do those complaints go in this limbo period?
All right, so the legislation says that you should avail yourself of whatever internal mechanisms are in place. But the same legislation says that if no mechanism is in place, or if you think that your interest will be prejudiced, then you can go straight to the tribunal. So in a situation where, for instance, in most domestic spaces, they won't really find a sexual harassment policy, a disciplinary policy, or a grievance procedure. So the law actually allows somebody in that situation where there's nothing in place to resolve the issue internally, or where the employer is the aggressor, to short-circuit the whole process and just make a complaint directly to the tribunal.
Thanks so much. Dr. Spence, one of the things, I think a recommendation that was made during the Joint Select Committee from an organization that I once was a part of, Jamaica AIDS Support for Life, very good work. They had made a call for the government to include a template in the legislation itself to guide persons and institutions, what kind of policy they can put in place. From where you sit, what are some of the things that employers and institutions should consider? For example, we heard Ms. Folks outlining that you may have situations where in your workplace doesn't really allow you the time to go and date outside of work. So you may have two persons in a relationship that is one of consent. How do you deal with situations like that, the practical approaches to implementing a policy?
Okay, I think one of the things we have to remember is that other places in the world have done this, and that our legislation was also modeled off some of the best practices in the world. Yes. And that the same situation that would have led to consideration as to how workplaces and other spaces in other parts of the world set up their response, we can draw on those too and make the appropriate adjustments for our particular cultural situation. So I would suggest that people look at how institutions, workplaces, and other spaces globally have developed policies and model after. I know that there was model policy, or there have been attempts by the Bureau and other regional institutional bodies to establish model policy, model legislation, and processes so people can look at them and learn how to do it from where it has been done and has been successful in other parts of the world. So I think people should just dedicate.
I think we've lost Dr. Spence.
Yes. And develop teams to doing that work, knowing that they are not starting from scratch. They can learn from other places in the world that are doing the same thing, and that if they pay attention to their own unique cultural, institutional, systemic realities, they will develop a system that responds appropriately. And it's not just about the complaints mechanism, it's also about how you attempt to change people's behavior.
Dr. Spence, can you hold that thought for us? And we're going to ask both of you just to stick with us for another 5 or so minutes. We're going to take a break and then we return.
There is no winning flavor. They're all finger-licking good. Order a meal deal or Family 9 bucket in original recipe, hot and spicy, or barbecue. The time by KFC is
1:31. 1:31.
The Bridge 99 FM, connecting Caribbean entertainment to the world.
We up, yeah. We up, yeah. Calling all bridge builders to the Bridge 99 FM, your global partners for outside broadcasts, connecting you from Jamaica to the world.
Where will we go?
From Kingston to Portmore, downtown, Spanish Town, Canada, USA, and as far as Dubai, we keep you connected across the 7 continents of the globe.
Call us at 876-6 876-630-3153 for information about partnering with the Bridge 99 FM.
That's 876-630-3153 to take your outside broadcasts to the world.
Bridge 99 FM. Live terrestrially in your territory. And also online at thebridge99fm.com.
It's about business for me. I'm in, I'm out. Easy access to all my meetings.
It's the range of rooms for me. I love the gym. I love the pool.
The restaurant and the bar do it for me. It's definitely the service. Our hotel in the heart of New Kingston, Jamaica's business capital, seamlessly blending boutique-style guest service with the highest level of professionalism, luxurious accommodation, and every modern amenity. Book now. Call us 876-968-6222 or visit ourhotelja.com.
KFC, original, hot and spicy and barbecue.
They call me the original, cut the hard way, no corners cut to live life the fried way. 11 herbs and spices. They wanna take a bite, I'm just a little tangy, but a whole lot of ice there, yeah.
This and the barbecue and the flavor and the taste, yeah. And we all like the place, yeah, yeah.
With KFC, there is no winning flavor. They're all finger licking good. Order a meal deal or Family 9 bucket today. KFC, it's finger licking good.
VP Records MRE presents hot new release by artist Robert French entitled Every Day of My Life.
Every day of my life will be I just loving you. Spend the rest of my life always I just loving you. Every day of my life will be
Available on all social media platforms. For booking, contact MRE at 876-868-5266. Every Day of My Life.
Roll call.
Sibali.
Jax Hill.
Roro.
Bridgetown.
Abbey.
Port of Spain.
Maracas.
New York.
White Plains.
Jamaica Avenue.
Brixton.
Scarborough.
Yard up for him, kick up. Rock wine.
Bridge 99 FM.
The people's champion. Our mission is love. Our vision is love. Jamaicans for justice. The people's champion. Justice.
Hi, welcome back to Let's Start Justice. We're looking at the sexual harassment legislation in the country. Before we took the break, we were with Dr. Spence. Are you still with us, Dr. Spence?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay, one of the things we note in the legislation was that companies would have a year to get their house in order, to put their policies in place. Are you satisfied with the level of public education that is currently being undertaken by the ministry?
Well, I'm not seeing anything, so I can't say I'm satisfied because I really haven't been hearing or seeing anything. As a matter of fact, I was having a conversation with some young women at Seacole Hall where I manage at CUE the other day, and I was asking them, have you been hearing anything from the university about the sexual harassment legislation? I know the university always had a sexual harassment policy, yes, but students didn't know about it then, and they still don't know about it. So I was, just telling them to ask, and they did write a letter. So say to them, ask how is the university going to be complying to ensure that it does what this legislation says it should do. But again, I was talking to a group of over 30 young women. Nobody knew of the legislation. Nobody could tell me anything about it. And on a regular, I just have conversations with young women and men, but mostly young women, about what they know about the legislation, and nobody knows about it. So, no, I'm not convinced that we're doing enough at this time to get people to become aware of it and to kind of talk about the behavior change that would be necessary for us to say it is doing the work that we expect it to do.
And before I turn over to Jade, and Jade, you can correct me here, if this act was gazetted last year, November,
yes,
and companies have
is
1 year We're now into November 1st.
They have 4 days to be compliant.
4?
Yes.
Oh, so it's not even the end of November.
They said 1 year.
So it's November 4th.
Would be November 5th to coming up.
Oh,
so
wow.
4 days from now should be the time that the companies are in compliance.
So even outside of the public education for the institutions, Dr. Spence, one of the things for me is a challenge, and I'm not sure from your perspective if you share this. We did not get street harassment, and a lot of our issues, we believe, is because of our sociocultural norms, the catcalling. We can't use some of the language that the men accost us with, especially. But what else can the Ministry of Gender do to do public education to John public around what is sexual harassment and how we can really change our culture that these things are no longer acceptable?
I think the ministry needs to devolve some of the responsibility of that to different bodies that have responsibility. For example, you have the Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission, which is responsible for overseeing some of the affairs of tertiary institutions, like the Edna Manis, which we know had a huge problem, the teachers' colleges, community colleges, and so on. So, and then looking at different spaces. So churches are supposed to have sexual harassment legislation, and we know that churches need to be held accountable in terms of how they execute, in terms of some of the practices and cultural behaviors around sex, and how young women and men are treated who come to them for spiritual healing. And we know that there's a lot of spiritual and sexual abuse that takes place in the church. We need to hear from the Teachers Association what is happening, because it's not just in schools in respect of students, but in respect of the teaching profession as well.
Yes.
In respect of the police force, what is happening in the police force, and we're talking about the army.
Yes.
So this kind of idea that it is the ministry that needs to actually go out and get the work. These organizations have boards, they have advisory bodies, they have different governance systems, and part of board governance in Jamaica is about ensuring that the appropriate policies and procedures are in place. So where, for example, I am in charge of an entity, one of the requirements of the entity is, let me see your sexual harassment policy.
Yes.
So how is the ministry engaging boards and engaging the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service to say your board chairs need to be trained to know that each entity that is a public body needs to bring on board its sexual harassment policy, and the entities that they lead need to put forward a plan of action that is going to see to it that within the public sector this thing is fully rolled out. I think private sector bodies are doing a much better job of doing so, but I think in the public service and the civil service we are going to have a problem, because I don't think we are using the governance mechanisms that are available within these spaces and the organizations that are available to ensure that they are rolled out, that it is rolled out.
So, thank you for that, Ms. Spence. I actually have a question for Ms. Folks.
Yes.
Yes. So my question is related to, all right, so we take the matter, we try it internally, you are dissatisfied, you can go to the tribunal. What happens after the tribunal? Is there a way for you to appeal a decision made by the tribunal? Is there a further mechanism? Can we engage the civil court? Does the act allow for that kind of procedure?
Ms. Folks?
Ms. Folks?
I think we may have lost her. Dr. Spencer, you're aware of the process of seeking. Ms. Folks is back
I'm
with
still
us?
here. Hello?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes, we weren't hearing you.
Jane was asking you about the tribunal and the process of getting redress and whether or not we can land some civil suit against companies.
Is it that if we disagree with the decision made by the tribunal, there's further mechanism? Is there any point where these matters can be taken to court outside of a criminal remedy?
Yes, you can appeal to the Supreme Court.
Okay.
Yes. I wanted to say something about the requirement for the policy to be in place within 12 months of the act.
Yes.
The law says within 12 months of the commencement date, and there is no commencement date as of yet. And so time has not really started to run. But this is a good time in which persons, institutions, employers can get their acts together and put the policies in place and do their sensitization.
Explain that commencement date for us, Ms. Folks.
All right. So the act was passed last year, which means that Parliament vetted it and approved it. However, the Governor General has to give assent for it to be activated, for you to be able to access rights under the legislation.
Oh, I thought it was gazetted.
Is it different than being gazetted?
Yes, it's different. The assent, the GG's assent is different. Just like with the Disabilities Act, it was passed in 2004, and then the commencement date would have been February 14 of this year.
Yes.
Similar to the Sexual Harassment Act. And also, in terms of the issues that persons are of the view that have not been addressed, for instance, the regular catcalling in the street, the law provides for periodic review. And so there will be other opportunities for those issues to be ventilated.
Can you remind us, if you have it, your memory is sharper than ours. When is the next review for this legislation, if you remember?
It's every 5 years.
Every 5?
Yes, every 5 years. Typically, it's 5 years the right into the legislation.
Is it 5 years after the commencement date or after the passing, the gazetting date?
It's the commencement date, man.
Right, so time would start to run from the commencement date. You see, you want to give the legislation enough time to prove itself because there might be other issues with it. So when the rubber hits the road, then you'll be able to see what other concerns, and then you might change your mind as to whether or not the scope needs to be widened. And so that 5-year period is, a time for testing, and then you can come back to the drawing board and see what aspects of policy need to be addressed.
Can I add something to that? It's on a related matter. The Sexual Offences Act, the last time it was reviewed, and the substances, it still hasn't got a commencement date.
Yes.
And so I hear, Michael, like your organization, talking about the review of the Sexual Offences Act. The last review period, whatever changes were made, we still are not benefiting from those as yet.
And the recommendation a report was placed, but we haven't heard anything as yet.
And the report was actually published in 2016, if I'm not mistaken.
2018.
So it was passed eventually in both houses, right, in Parliament, and then we are still waiting. 5 years after, we're still waiting on a commencement date. So that's something for us to understand about our process. Because I was going to ask if you're sure that we have a commencement date on the sexual harassment legislation, which means that in effect it was passed, but there is no date that says this is when. As of now, it's applicable in Jamaica. That hasn't happened. Unless that happens, even though we have it on paper, we don't have a law in action.
So I ask, in this time, what are we doing with the complaints that we have heard the minister say we're getting?
Same thing we were doing before we had legislation. Nothing.
Thank you.
Well, I do hope that if it's not through the Ministry of Gender, then I suspect a number of those complaints were workplace related. I'm hoping that the unit in the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, perhaps they are addressing them. It's something for us to follow up on, because we don't want to continue this culture of silence where persons feel as if they have no opportunity to speak and to get redress. So, yes, was that Dr. Spence?
No, Kadria.
Okay.
I would want to think that the cases are being queued for when the tribunal is up and running. And also the first review of the act is 18 months after the commencement date. So it's not that much time, really.
Okay.
Great.
All right, great.
Thank you for that.
All right, thank you both for joining, and we look forward, Kadria, to have you when we're discussing OSHA.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And Dr. Spence, we look forward to having you when we're discussing the Domestic Violence Act. I tell you, there's so many things that we want to really probe based on these long-awaited bills and acts that require some attention. So thanks again to you both. That was Dr. Nadine Spence and Miss Kadria Folks.
No problem. Thanks for inviting me.
right, we're going to take a break, and then on the other side, we take your calls and we have some discussions.
From Black Bridge to the George Washington Bridge, from the top of the Empire State Building to the Blue Mountain Peak, from the Grill Point to Morant Point to Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, Manhattan, New York City.
Imagine your advertising dollar reaching your Caribbean and diaspora target beyond borders in a single rotation. It happens only on the bridge. Call now to advertise 876-669-5000.
I put it down on the wrong one.
Hold up, wait a minute.
Sex.
On the bridge?
Every Tuesday at 10 p.m.
We talk about the forbidden, the inevitable, the truth. Nothing is untouched. It's live with me, dancehall queen Carlene.
Download the Bridge app, be on the 99, and tune in this Tuesday after dark.
The conversation is intellectual and maybe tantric, but always entertaining as we hear from the expert and you.
SOD, this Tuesday at 10 p.m.
Download the Bridge 99 FM app now from the Google Play Store or the Apple Store.
Whether you want corn meal or Dominican, peanut bulgur or oats, anyone, we've got you covered. Sophia, all of me porridge lovers. Good morning. Start your day with a bowl of porridge from the porridge shop. No wait till it cool, get it when it's hot. Straight from the pot. Good morning. Start your day with a bowl of porridge from the porridge shop. And the perfect meal for breakfast, sir. Come to the porridge shop and get that.
Watch the man, you don't know this advice at the end present for the Bridge 99 FM connecting. We said that station, you're a leader. I will say, give him like a time, a little feature. Under the moonlight and Sensimania. The Bridge 99 FM, the end representing.
The people's champion. Our mission is love. Our vision is love. Jamaicans for justice. The people's champion. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, Jamaica demand. Right.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. Today we are talking about the sexual harassment legislation, and we are in the call-in portion.
So we're reminding persons of our numbers. The studio line is 676-4996, and you can WhatsApp us at 239-7583.
Yes, and while we wait on your calls, we have a few things going on our social media pages. So our comms officer was out and about this week. So
he was in the streets.
He was in the streets.
Okay.
But yes, so we did a poll where we asked persons about whether or not there was already a sexual harassment policy in their workplace. And I think one thing too that we have to realize is even if we have one, we might have to revise it because there are specific forms required, specific provisions that the act would ask to be included, that you must comply with. So you may have one, but they may need to be revised in the coming months, hopefully, and not years. But yes, so is there a sexual harassment policy at your workplace? So we ran this poll in 2 different places. We ran it on Instagram, where 56% of respondents said there was a sexual harassment policy at their place. 44 said no. And then on Twitter, 90% of our Twitter respondents said yes. And one thing I said to the comms officer is that we have our Twitter following is a different demographic.
Yeah, I think you always have to look at those socio-demographic factors.
Yeah, and on our YouTube channel, we had 100%. And, you know, again, I say our demographics.
Because of who we've targeted.
Yes.
But were there any comments around the implementation or adherence to those policies? Did people give you an idea of what was happening within their spaces?
Well, I know that we went ahead and did a vox pop.
Okay.
So I think we have a few of those comments.
So the young
queued
people
up.
use the technology to get the information.
Well, us young people.
All right, it's fine. I declare my old hand.
Yeah, so we're about to hear some of those comments.
Yes, there is a sexual harassment policy at my place of employment. However, I wouldn't feel comfortable making a report because I work in a very small space and I would rather leave the space rather than make a report because I feel as if it wouldn't be anonymous and it would get around that I was the one that made the report. So I wouldn't feel comfortable making a report. I would rather leave the space.
And you know, before we move on to the next one, that is something that I think we were probing with Nadine as well about the implementation of these policies, because one of the things you have to consider is the makeup of the workplace. That confidentiality factor, is that going to be there? I know a lot of places don't have a human resources manager, but they have employees, and when that is the case, where does this complaint go? So it's this person's comment.
The internal structure is important for people to consider.
Absolutely, because she's worried about
whether or not
her information will come out. And I wonder, and I wish we still had Miss Folks with us to help us respond to this, but I wonder what, if anything, is there in the act itself, outside of what would be an internal policy to deal with the confidentiality of complaints. I know
but
that
I think
for the
a part
tribunal,
of the policy, though, requires you to keep things confidential and anonymous. So I would suspect that in not adhering to those procedural guidelines,
or maybe that's a cause of action for the tribunal
in breach,
yes.
and therefore that would be some cause. To the technical team, I think the vox pop, they're a little bit low, so if we could maybe turn it up a little. All right, so we'll listen out for the next one.
Is there a sexual harassment policy? Yes, I actually believe it was introduced at orientation. Would I feel comfortable making a report? Probably not. And I think especially for many reasons, obviously victimization is a big thing. However, especially as a male, as a man, there's also stereotypes, especially in Jamaica, not going to take it seriously, etc. And even for organizations that do hear, going through the long processes, probably just taking you through grievance procedures, etc., to avoid lawsuits with companies. So it's not one that in the end favors victims and offers that kind of support in the end. So I probably wouldn't.
Wow. Okay, so it's a similar sentiment. So we're hearing, yes, the policy is there, but I'm not confident in how my complaint will be handled or how these issues will be addressed, or whether or not they would be. But you know, the this person brings up something that I think a lot of people have on their mind. How will men affected by sexual harassment deal with it?
But to be fair to the Joint Select Committee and the Ministry, the bill is quite gender neutral. So I think it goes to the socio-cultural norms around how men feel as if they can't make a report because they will somehow be laughed at, ridiculed because of this hyper-masculinity we have in our culture.
Yep.
And we hear the same things when we look at rape and men reporting that they are survivors of rape and domestic abuse and so on. So let's listen to the others and see what else they're saying.
I don't think people take male reports seriously, so no, I wouldn't report it.
Short and sweet. And again, going over the same sentiment. And what's unfortunate is that a lot of the dismissiveness towards certain kinds of pain that men might experience is unfortunately coming from their own community, and that plays a role in them feeling uncomfortable in making the complaints. Just colloquially, I would have heard men say, "Oh, if I'm going to report a sexual assault, for example, I'd rather get a female officer." Or I'd rather speak to a woman, or if I'm going to go to a nurse about something to do with the effects of an assault, I'd rather have a woman doctor or a woman nurse.
Yeah.
Because there is the perception that there would be greater empathy coming from these persons than their male counterparts, unfortunately.
I agree. And I think while we acknowledge that women are disproportionately affected, especially younger women, by domestic abuse, rape, sexual assault, and so on, I think we have to be careful that we do not put a situation where men feel as if they can't report. I think we have another recording.
Yes, there is a sexual harassment policy at place in my work.
They've been very open about it and very clear on the steps one should take if they are sexually harassed. Would I feel comfortable? I would feel comfortable making that report. Obviously, I'm saying that even though I've never been in the position and I understand how women would second guess themselves and the interaction based on that, I think that it also has to do with how long you're in an organization. So because the longer I'm in that one organization, the more comfortable I feel, but I don't think I would have been as comfortable in my first year or in my first couple months.
Yeah, I can see that as a challenge as well, because especially if it's, and not to belabor the JDF point because we don't know that much about it, but for example, that would have been a high-ranking, long-standing officer. And in those situations, you might find it more difficult, especially as somebody who is new in an organization or in a certain level at an organization to be the person to stir the pot when everyone else seems to be observing the behavior and doing nothing.
And, I want to say on the JDF matter quickly, we have applauded the women for their bravery in coming forward. And I listened to an interview with the former Chief of Defense, Rear Admiral Hartley, who dismissed claims that there's a culture of sexual harassment in the JDF, and he asserted that whatever happened at the JDF could have happened anywhere else. And one must be mindful that we don't put that sort of statement or behavioral stance towards the organization. But I think organizations such as JDF and others, and we've had several reports from where JFJ sits within the corporate entities, several of them. I won't even state their sectors because one might put some one and two together.
Yes.
But I think corporate entities, institutions must be able to look within themselves and say, have I done enough? Have I treated these complaints seriously? And I think before we wrap up, I'm really calling on the ministry to our understanding when we talk about gazetting. It does mean that the Governor General would have assented the act.
That it is in
And
place.
from our perspective and our reading, this thing was gazetted and would have become effective November. But even so, and if we stand corrected, if it's otherwise, but it really means that the ministry ought to be galvanizing the institutions and their governance structures, as Dr. Spence outlined, to really put the policy and the act to effect. I don't think we can turn a blind eye anymore to those things at all.
Absolutely.
All right, so over to you, Jade, with our trivia and the winner.
Yes.
Young people, business, and time.
So,
oh wow,
it is quite unfortunate this week, and maybe our trivia was a bit too hard. But we don't.
You see, legal-minded people at JFJ, double trivia.
So we don't have a winner this week.
Answered.
We don't have a winner this week, but I think what we are going to do is, instead of broadcasting the answer, we'll give you guys one more day. So the trivia will be posted on our social media pages. We won't be awarding anyone that is not following the page, so please follow the page and comment on the post. And if you comment, the first person to give us the correct answer for both questions will be the person that wins. So our comms officer will be in touch with you for that winning prize.
Great, so that's good. So that was it, or that is it for this week?
Yes, that is it. So thank you, old Mikkel, for joining me. I am Jade Williams, the young person on the show. This was Let's Talk Justice, and we'll be back next week, same time at 1 p.m.
Yes, I'm Mikkel Jackson. Have a good week.
The people's champion. Our mission is love. Our vision is love. Jamaicans for justice. The people's champion. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, Jamaica demand. Right to life, right to liberty. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, the people demand. Right to life and security. Oh, what a joy. Oh, what a peace. Oh,